Okay, so here we are again, Srini. Good to see you this morning. I guess it's afternoon for you, right?
Yes, just about, and it's
Just
fantastic to see you.
yeah,
Yeah.
good to see you. So we're trying a new app today called Blue Jeans, and I know that they just released this perfect timing app for us to stream to Facebook. So I'm going to be trying my best to keep an eye on the chat that's happening on Facebook and what's happening here. And I think it's kind of perfect because we're talking about tinkering, and I feel like I'm tinkering. So maybe I'll be practicing and getting the benefits of what we're actually talking about, if that's possible.
I think so, because I think it demonstrates one of the first advantages of tinkering when it comes to stress management, which is that if you tinker, then your mindset changes from perfectionism to trying. And so you feel rewarded just by trying. And a lot of people feel stressed out because they come at this and come at life and every day in their lives with this notion that they've got to be perfect at everything. And I think for both of us, we're like, okay, we're trying out this new thing. I don't even know what it is. If it fails, then we'll know that we should try something else. And I think people will understand that what we want to do is our intention is to share this information with them, in a digestible way, but also at the same time share, I think, our own humanity about this. Because I think so often people forget that just because we're teaching people stress management doesn't mean we manage our stress perfectly every day. And I think just reminding myself, wait a minute, some things in life are tinkering can actually be really helpful because it changes my expectation. Then I don't expect to be perfect at it.
So you just said like 20 amazing things in a couple of sentences, and I want to digest all of them and process all of them and make sure everybody's getting this. So before we get into all the details, I just want to remind everybody that I'm Heidi Hanna and I'm with Srini Pillay, and we have these incredible conversations, or at least we humbly think that they're incredible. And we thought it would be fun to share them with our community and build a community where we can talk seriously, but in a fun way about stress and what happens to the brain when we're experiencing stress, and practical tools that will help you to transform your relationship with stress. So we thought it would be fun today to talk about this idea of tinkering. So I happened to see Srini a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me about his new book, which is actually available now, and you can just Google tinkering and Srini Pillay, and you'll find it. We'll actually post a link here at the bottom as well. But just this whole notion of tinkering and the power of the unfocused mind, because we spend so much time thinking about how to improve performance and focus and attention and mindfulness and all of those things. And you were just mentioning that sometimes we get so serious about it that we actually hinder our ability to be creative, and to actually maximize our productivity. So what you just talked about, which I think is brilliant, is the mindset of tinkering, that when we're just playing with something or we're looking at it as an experiment, we actually can do so. So what's happening? What's actually happening in the brain when we switch from being like full force trying to get something done to just saying, hey, I'm just going to tinker with this, whether it's an actual object or it's a concept?
So a lot of different things. I think one thing to remember is that when we're stressed, we tend to focus on what we're doing. We're like, okay, I'm stressed now. I'm just going to finish this thing. And we struggle really hard to really focus on something. But when we're focusing on something, the focus circuits in the brain also get tired. And so if you focus throughout your entire day without having any tinker or dabbling or doodling or trying throughout the day, then you exhaust your focus circuits. And tinkering is a form of unfocus. It's basically saying every 45 minutes to half hour, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes of tinkering time for two reasons. Tinkering itself will bring on the creativity circuits in the brain and will help you get yourself out of habit. Remember, one of the things I think you'll hear me say a million times is that stress precipitates habit pathways in the brain. And so if we just try to
explain that for people, that makes sense to me, but explain specifically what that means. So stress facilitates these habit formations
in the brain.
Do we know how? Yeah, is that the chemicals that are being released are actually strengthening those pathways, or what's happening?
So when we learn, right, we want to learn and we want to change, and if we're faced with an obstacle, we want to be able to think differently. But when you're stressed, you can actually get stressed to the point of being paralyzed. And then you get stuck in old habit pathways in the brain. And that's partly because some of the hormones that are released can actually cause this paralytic reaction, this frozen reaction, and your
Mm.
brain gets stuck in the same pathway. So one of the things we want to do is become unstuck. And so
Yeah.
tinkering can actually help you become unstuck through a number of different mechanisms. So firstly, one of the biggest things to remember when it comes to managing stress is you don't have to get rid of it all, because some of
Right.
it is good, right?
Yes.
And the second thing is you don't have to do it all now. You can do it a little bit at a time, because your brain gets kind of overwhelmed. If you're like, you know what, I'm tired of living in the suburbs. I'm too stressed out. I'm moving to the city tomorrow. Your brain's gonna be like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't afford a place in the city. You can like, I'm gonna make you even more stressed. If
Right.
you're like in a relationship and you're like, this person is really driving me crazy. I'm totally stressed out, and they just don't get it. I'm leaving. So your brain's gonna be like, what are you talking about? Like, can we just go a little slow? Can we try to explore this? Can we go one day at a time, one step at a time? And there's a lot of wisdom to that. And the
Yeah.
paradox is that if you start approaching life by teaching yourself one step at a time principles, you will learn new and exponential ways to actually get to places. Because what you start doing when you're tinkering is, rather than just going zoom here, focus here, focus here, focus here, you go one little step at a time. And each step takes you to the next step. And you actually have the time and the pause to notice what else may be happening around you. Now, everyone in life is so stressed. And we feel like we know what we're doing and we know what the solutions are. We know what the solutions are on our paths, but we don't know what the solutions are outside of our paths. And if we bother to stop, which is part of what tinkering is about, we can actually help ourselves get to our goals because we give ourselves the opportunity to see other things. So
Yeah.
I think the question you asked was so large at some level, like what does tinkering do to the brain? Like a million things. But
Yeah.
the first thing it does is it helps you chunk up overwhelming activities into smaller activities. It activates your curiosity, which is so fantastic. I mean, think about how we are as kids, going around, being interested. I actually went to a great school called the Tinkering School in San Francisco. And
Oh, wow.
it is a fantastic school. And what was interesting about it was that it was actually this guy, Giver Tully was his name, started the school, and it's because he thought he was a lousy student. It's because he couldn't learn in a rote way. And he now built the entire curriculum around tinkering. So they don't have, this is the kind of school my parents would never have sent me to, because it was, they don't have classes, they have bands, people of all ages. They don't have
Wow.
formal reading and math instruction. They learn through doing. And they give them a theme for 3 months, like nails. One person will write a screenplay, one person will count nails, make a chair. And at some point it sounds crazy, right? Yet by the fifth grade or something like that, they are 2 grades higher than the national average. Meaning, by learning how to tinker, you become smarter because you rely on what's inside of you rather than what someone is telling you.
It's
So,
interesting that you say that too, because I did an interview recently with Peter Gray, who's going to be speaking at our Therapeutic Humor Conference in Orlando in April. And he's at Boston College, and he was talking about, play as part of the learning process. And even if you go back and look at, cultures previously, that they didn't have this formal education, but through the act of play, they learned rules about how to engage with people. And even one of my favorite things he talked about was that when you play, there's the understanding that we both have to be in the game. So while we may compete with each other, there are some rules about kindness and fairness and trust that are established, because if we don't have those, you're going to quit the game. So just that framework around, and it sounds like what you're saying with these different bands and different opportunities, is if you are curious and you want to be part of this experience, you kind of have to let go of some of the ego and some of the fear and some of the stuff that gets in our way so many times.
yeah, plus, when you're stressed, I find we take ourselves too seriously in general. And when you're stressed, we take ourselves even more seriously. So Here's another practical example. One of my best friends and I realized that when we get angry, when we have a couple glasses of wine, we get too truthful. We start saying stuff that's actually truthful about the other person. And because we're objective enough to hear it, we're like, wow, do I do that? That's truthful and it hurts. And it makes me kind of transiently hate you. And it makes me want to find something to say back to you. And it's sort of it's a strange way of behaving. But what's cool about it is that we made a rule that because we're so close, that everything is a game. So when you're close, part of being close is having a relationship, and part of having a relationship is that if you treat it like a game, we decided at a certain point, if one of us says enough, we stop instantly and we hug each other, and that's done. And what's cool about that is that way of de-stressing, which is called pattern interrupt, is we don't just go with the pattern. We actually de-stress by saying, when it gets too much for one person, treat it like a game, and then use pattern interrupt. So I think, up until this point, what we're saying is we want people to think about their lives differently so as to anticipate how they can manage stress. Like a lot of people, when I talk to them about stress, they're like, what are you going to tell me about stress? My stress is not going away. I still have financial stress. I still got relationship stress. I still got stress about X, Y, or Z. And I say, well, I don't think I'm going to be able to immediately take away your stress. But we have to remember that stress causes a number of diseases, or at least it contributes to a number of diseases. And if
unmanaged stress, not necessarily stress itself, but when we have that chronic unmanaged stress, because we know some short-term stress is actually effective, and we both agree with that and can build you up. But if you don't have the reserves, that's where it breaks you down. I just want to pause you for 1 second because we have a bunch of people commenting, and so I'd love to just get a little bit of feedback. That's one of the reasons we wanted to do this live. So one of the things is Corey actually just wanted to know the name of the school that you mentioned in San Francisco. Did you say it was the Tinkering School?
The Tinkering School. It's called, so the summer school is actually called the Tinkering School, and the associated school is called Brightworks.
Brightworks. Okay, wonderful. So for Corey, who had that question, we were just kind of going back and forth. And we also have, I know Linda and KA is on as well. So if you're on and you have questions or comments, put them in the chat box. I am keeping an eye on that, and we want to engage you in this conversation as well. And as you can see, Srini and I can do this all day with our own questions, but we want to make sure that we're engaging you in this as well. So I know one of the questions that's going to come up for people, and I'd love to get to this, and then we'll kind of come back and talk about the how again, is, about the why, I guess, is how. So what would you consider tinkering? I was thinking about that this morning, because sometimes, what you've shared so far is it's a framework or a mindset. And I love that we're tinkering with this even right now, with experimenting with this show or this conversation. But there's also like physical tinkering. Linda talks about gardening. I know my mom loves to just kind of tinker in the garden to just let your brain kind of run loose. So what would be your recommendations if someone's listening to this and saying, okay, I want to do that more? Are there any guidelines or parameters you would suggest?
A whole book's worth, yes. So a lot of different ways. So just to comment, I'll just riff off some of what you mentioned. So I think one of the questions was, what are some of the attributes of this mindset? And the other was, does gardening help, or do activities like that help? And I think in terms of the attributes of the mindset, the first thing I think we can do on a call like this is ask people to use what I call the possibility mindset. Right. Now, the possibility mindset is basically believing that something is possible because you tell your brain that it's possible. It doesn't know how to get to the solution. Like if you're like, brain, I need another $100,000. Your brain's not going to say, oh, this is how you do it. This is the way you do it, because it's difficult to do that. But if you tell your brain it's impossible for me to get $100,000, your brain says, thank you, good night, I'm going to sleep.
Wow.
So you don't want your brain to go offline. You want to keep it online. And to keep your brain online, you use the possibility mindset. Now, what is the possibility mindset? The possibility mindset is based on self-talk. And self-talk can actually change your brain. We have thousands of studies on cognitive behavior therapy that actually show us that if you learn how to talk to yourself differently, you can actually change your brain blood flow. Now, one of the things around this is saying to yourself, if you're faced with a difficult challenge, so let's say right now, and I'll say it just so everyone is listening, if you have somebody in your life who's really giving you a hard time, but you don't know how to talk to them, or you have some difficult financial situation, or you have a difficult situation with meaning in life and you don't really know what to do, or you don't know what to do at your job, you're sort of stuck there and you need to make money, but at the same time, you want to acknowledge who you truly are and you don't know how to transition to that. These are the kinds
Yeah.
of things that people get stuck with. The first thing
Right.
is the self-talk and literally say to yourself, you can do this. And I'm saying that in a particular way because studies have shown that if you self-talk in the second person, instead of saying, I can do this, if you say, Srini, you can do this, it actually de-stresses you. So
Mm.
that's a very interesting piece of information to know that in the second person, I mean, just if you forget this principle, it's like one of my greatest obsessions, Serena Williams, when she's playing tennis, when she walks back to the baseline, she's always talking to herself, come on, Serena, you can do it, Serena. And part of it is actually calling herself Serena. Why doesn't she just say, come on, I can do it? And part of it is that when you call yourself by name, you can actually de-stress. And by de-stressing, you allow your brain to then focus on what it needs to focus on. So
Okay, so I'm going to stop you again just because this is all fabulous and I get it. Why do you I mean, because again, you're kind of inside the minds of what's actually happening from a neuroscience perspective. So when I say, which totally feels weird, Heidi, relax, or Heidi, you can do this, I mean, it feels like I'm talking to a mirror, right, and giving myself these positive affirmations. So is it that we're hearing our own name? Is it that we kind of distance ourselves from ourselves? Or do you have any sense of why that would be so powerful?
I don't think we've studied it enough, but there are a lot of hypotheses based on other data. So the first thing is that I think we're caught in a pattern, right? So you're stressed, you're freaked out, you're like, I just lost 3 points, I might lose this entire game. So what's the first thing you want to do? Say it's possible, and then
Right.
do a pattern interrupt. So by talking to yourself, you take yourself out of this loop where when you're in that situation, you have a voice inside you telling yourself, you're going to fail, you're never going to make it, you might lose a set, prepare to lose. So you challenge that voice inside of your head, and you're like, wait a minute, Heidi, because there are two parts to every person. There's an observing part and an experiencing part. And when those parts are disconnected, there's a lot of stress. But when those
Yeah.
parts are connected and you switch between the two, stress is significantly reduced. So by saying Heidi, what you're doing is you're invoking what we call the observing self, saying as if it's from outside of you and it's observing you. And when you then observe yourself in that way, you're taking yourself out of the immediate situation. Remember, part of what's causing the stress is that stressful situation. So when you're saying
Right.
Heidi, you're actually changing the nature of self in that moment. So I would
It
say
kind of
that
makes me laugh too. Like, I just to add that point of what we're talking about, even with tinkering and play sometimes is I realize this is very serious, but there's a part of me that is like, it's almost because you're breaking that pattern and you're speaking to yourself. Maybe not everybody does this, but there could be a playfulness to that, a tinkering element to that. That's like, okay, I'm talking to myself now. I mean, I hear some of the things you're saying about this internal dialogue, and with both of us, sometimes people look and go, these are the experts, so they don't have that problem. Well, we do. We have those same voices. It's just learning this literally like a strategy to break the pattern. I always use appreciate, adjust, adapt, but like appreciate why that's happening, adjust it somehow. And then by doing that over time, we start to adapt to this whole new way of doing and seeing the world. So I think there can be an element of playfulness in that by saying our own name and giving ourselves a new script that we then practice. And by the way, if anyone knows Serena Williams, maybe you could give her a message to hang out on our show with us. That'd be really fun, wouldn't it?
that would be
It's
fantastic.
possible. We are just putting everything out there as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, what possibility does? It does two other things. So from placebo studies, where we know, if you take a sugar pill or you take
Mm-hmm.
a real painkiller, for example, believing that the sugar pill is going to work releases opioids in your brain, which cause brain relaxation. So that's another why, which is possibility thinking, releases opioids in your brain for a period of time. So for a period of time, you're actually de-stressing. The second thing is studies have shown that even if let's say you've got pain, like real pain, and I give you a drug that's a real analgesic, if you believe that the drug is going to work, like you're like, wow, you're giving me something that's going to work, that's awesome. It actually doubles the impact of the analgesic. If you believe that the drug is not going to work, it negates the impact of a real analgesic. So believing matters. And one of the reasons we know this is that believing in possibility is rewarding to the brain. So, in summary, there are a lot of mechanisms here, but the first thing is possibility keeps your brain circuits online. Secondly, using self-talk in the second person by calling yourself by name and saying you can help de-stress because you are breaking the pattern and you are talking to yourself. The third thing is it increases opioids, which cause relaxation. And the fourth thing is it is stimulating dopamine pathways in the brain, which are the reward pathways that are making you feel rewarded.
So here's what I hear you saying is like this chemical cocktail. As you're adding all of these things, it's like, in a sense, you're setting the stage or creating the environment in the brain to have these strengthened connections in the right way. So what we talked about before was that stress can hardwire connections in a negative, pattern, habit where we get stuck doing the same thing. And that just by shifting to this mindset of possibility, we create this chemical cocktail that helps to strengthen those pathways in that positive direction. So I feel like so many people who are probably listening right now are very familiar with this, but I think for some reason we minimize it. It's almost like it's so simple, it can't really be that effective.
Yeah, because people think they're faking it, right? They're like, well, why should I say it's possible if I have no idea how? Well,
right.
It's sort of, I think William James is one of those people who says something like, and this is not a direct quote, but, we stand in the midst of a mountain pass with whirling snow. If we stand still, we shall be dashed to pieces. If we move, we will either be saved or be lost. What should we do? And I think for so many people, as you know, I always revert to my perennial philosophy of life, which is you live, you die, you do something in between. That's my guiding principle. And my whole idea about that is, well, if you're going to do something in between, why not believe it's possible and then explain? Now, some people will say, well, that just sounds hokey. Like, it's just not possible. It's like, well, actually, that's the basis of all of science. Every scientific experiment is based on a hypothesis. It's not based on knowing something. And then you explore the hypothesis and you test it. And if it's right, then you follow that. If it's wrong, you find another direction. But the nature of science is actually based on possibility. So it's not hokey. As long as we keep it out of this, I believe it's possible, but I don't know how it's going to come to me. It's like, well, that could work, but it works for so few people and it's not replicable. You can't replicate that. It makes it difficult. But I think if you can just think of your life like a scientific experiment and say, well, this is my hypothesis. I'm not sure if I'm going to date this person. I'm going to go out in a couple of days, see what happens. If
it's so amazing. Yeah. And even in my work, I've noticed with individuals and coaching or consulting with companies is, it seems so clear in my mind. I want to make these kind of prescriptive, just do this, do this, do this. And I've really shifted lately to saying, let's make it a challenge. Let's make it a game. What are you willing to do, even just for a week? Because I think when we think like, let's talk about self-care, for example, we all know we should be taking better care of ourselves, but we're busy, we don't have time, we don't have money, whatever the situation is. And it's like, if I think about doing it perfectly, it's just too much. To your point, the brain just can't fathom doing all of that. But if I say, okay, you know what, for 1 week, I'm going to just try this and see what happens. My good friend, Dr. Evian Gordon, who you had the chance to meet in the last Brainathon, we talk about this a lot, how important it is to get those small wins, to get those dopamine releases, and then to share it with somebody for the oxytocin release. So, and I think it's fun that as we know more about the brain and what's actually happening, we can now say, like, this isn't magic. This is special sauce that's literally like being poured into your brain to help correct these things. And by the way, in addition to strengthening these neural pathways, it's also nourishing to minimize the damage that's been done by the stress in the past, because we know that stress over time, shortens the telomeres. I mean, you can see all of this kind of genetic shaping happening as a result to negative stress, but we know that through possibility thinking and tinkering and play and humor and meditation, that you can start to reduce that and repair that. But I think a big piece of it is those daily intentions, like not trying to do it all immediately, but setting that mindset first thing in the morning of being more playful and being in an experiment just for the day, and then having just a couple of nudges or shifts that you make in a more positive direction. So for you personally, I'd love to, because we can do this and we're live and I'm keeping an eye on some of the comments and questions here, is what have you personally found most effective to help you shift into that kind of tinkering mindset?
So a lot of different things. I think, one of the things that caught my attention in what you just said is, and I really love this idea, is that we do have like all the fixings for a cocktail in our heads already. And so if we can figure out a way to release just the right amount of dopamine, the right amount of opioids, all of these receptors, we have the most amazing receptors in our brains. And when people say, oh, I can't just do that, I'm just going to use a drug, I'm like, well, the beautiful thing about any drug, pharmaceutical or not, is that it is acting on your brain, and your brain already has the capacity to do this. You're just making it happen faster. So
Right.
if your brain already has the capacity to do this, why wouldn't you just take advantage of it? So I would say that for me, that's the inspiration. I think that the way I handle stress specifically depends on the situation. And as you know, this whole martinis to meditation thing is sort of the way I think about life. Sometimes life needs a martini, sometimes it needs meditation. I would
Right.
say that part of it is the most important thing from my perspective, and this is a little bit of a radical idea. It's not a widespread idea, but I can justify it biologically, is that I think that stress has to do with being disconnected from yourself.
Totally agree.
I think when you are in yourself, you're not stressed. And the one piece of research I'll cite to support this is if you look at the meta-analyses, so studies that have examined huge numbers of studies on what correlates with stress, the inverse correlate with burnout and is engagement, which means the more you're engaged, the less burnt out you are. And people forget this because they think, wait a minute, are you telling me like I should work harder? And I'm thinking, no, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. It's about figuring out a way that you can feel connected with whatever you're doing so that you lose this kind of self-consciousness and the kind of observing, experiencing self we were talking about. You start by separating it out when you're stuck, but the goal eventually is to find something that makes you feel whole again. So, very simple things. I find exercise to be an amazing way of just, bypassing all the emotional things and all the cognitive things and just letting your body be sort of the back door to reducing stress. And I think that's back.
Even with the exercise experience, there's a big difference between exercising because you're punishing or torturing yourself, which I feel like I did for many years, and exercising because you're enjoying the experience in your body and actually being mindful with that. And I want to encourage anybody who's not there yet that sometimes you have to push through the initial like getting started because it's pretty miserable. But once you get to the point where you enjoy that, I think the whole experience changes. I wrote about this in one of my books where I talked about the fact that they did studies on rats. And I always laugh, like we're not exactly rats, but we'll look at their studies anyway and make some comparisons. But essentially they were showing that forced exercise did not have the same benefits as chosen exercise, playful exercise. And so I think when we understand the stress mindset and what happens when we're doing something because we feel forced, it changes that chemical cocktail in the brain again. So, being able to get into exercise, same with meditation. If you're sitting there and you're like, this is miserable and I hate this, it's probably not the style for you. But meditation can be an experience that you do just by listening to music or watching something funny. I think the key is that you're getting engaged in the moment. And what you were talking about is that you're aligned. I always say that the two most stressful things we do is try to be someone we're not or be somewhere we're not. Meaning, if I'm showing up and I've got this mask on that I feel like I have to live up to, that is exhausting. And if I'm here with you, but I'm thinking about something somewhere else, that's exhausting. And yet most of us do that all the time. And so when we can really kind of tune in with, this is who I am and this is what I'm most passionate about, or this is what I believe in, and then tinker with it, right? Because I want to get back to the whole idea of possibility and play and tinkering and kind of even just setting up your day that way. I mean, what a shift. And when you said your whole kind of philosophy of life, we live, we die, we do some stuff in between. That's a very playful, it's serious because you want to make impact with that. But if we take it too serious, again, we get stuck in that. So we want to keep it playful and fun. And I want to just kind of encourage everybody right now to be thinking about this. And I just jotted down a note to come up with a tinkering toolkit. And I'm sure your book has tons of information about that. But even right now, as you're listening to us have this conversation, I'm sure there are things coming up in your mind. And I've seen many people saying yoga and gardening and photography and these different playful things. But to have a toolkit for yourself that you can use regularly, be intentional, put it into your schedule regularly. Because what I find is that when we are stuck and we are stressed, we don't think logically enough to go, oh, I'm going to go tinker, so we have to be proactive about that.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I put together a tinkering toolkit to go along with what I've offered in the book. Awesome. I think what's cool about the gardening thing, I'll make a brief comment on that. So one of the forms of tinkering that is highly recommended is daydreaming. And when I say that, people are always like, what are you talking about? Like, that's how I waste time at work. That's how and it's like, well, actually, there are different kinds of daydreaming that have been studied. So there's a guy in the 1950s, Jerome Singer, who studied daydreaming. And he found that if you daydream so that you suddenly slip into the daydream, and then suddenly you have these guilty or depressive ruminations, where your thoughts are going over and over again, that's not helpful.
Right.
He defined what we call positive constructive daydream. And this is what we know about positive constructive daydream. The first thing is that it needs to be volitional. So you decide when to build it into your day. So the person who gardens, I'm doing gardening twice this week. I'm going home at 5:30 to 6 is my gardening time. I'm going to the garden, pick something up, plant something, look something up during the day. So the first thing is that it has to be volitional. The process is basically decoupling from perception. So your whole day, you have to pay attention to everything outside of you.
Right.
But this is the thing that most excites me. Honestly, if you want to get me totally excited, just keep on reminding me about this in people, because this is the message that I think we are fundamentally trying to share with people, which is that the answer to most questions lies within us. But we spend so little time in our own heads. Our whole days are spent engaging things with our perceptual organs. So we're looking at people, we're looking at stuff, we're looking at emails, we're getting messages. But how much time do you spend in your own head? Yeah. And if you spend just half an hour a day in your own head, it turns off the anxiety and stress circuits like gardening. It turns on the creativity circuits, and things like gardening, which are a form of positive constructive daydreaming, work because you decide deliberately, but also because they're low effort. So studies have shown that no effort positive constructive daydreaming is not as effective as low effort, and high effort is not effective at all. So gardening is one of these volitional, low effort activities that gets you to wander through your mind. And for anyone who's listening, I guarantee if you give yourself a half hour or 45 minutes just to say to yourself, today is my day. Like, I want to discover myself. Yeah. I want to know more about what's in my head. And I can tell you, I've seen this over and over again in my clinical practice. Just people who've wandered inside their heads are like, oh my God, like what a treasure trove of information. I've spent my whole life trying to get answers from other people, when in fact, The answer has been inside of me. And Heidi, one of the reasons I love doing this particular format with you, and I think we talked about this, is that when you can be engaged enough with someone that you don't have to be conscious about yourself, and you don't have to be preaching, or where the conversation is just organic, like it's not like we sat here and wrote down a list of questions and decided something. That notion is really what I want to share with people. That I think that every human being on earth has this kernel of ingenuity that is being missed because we don't spend enough time wandering inside our heads. And studies have shown that when you wander inside your head, you can turn off a lot of the stress pathways. So wandering is a beautiful form of tinkering. It's a little bit like if you go on a hike and you're like, wait a minute, this is the path, but I kind of want to go off the beaten path.
Yeah. Okay, I got to ask you a question because I'm finding myself stirred by this, and this is why I like that we have the conversation. The first thing I wanted to say about gardening is you're also in nature, so that's amazing. But I'm guessing that more people than just me have this thought when you're talking about wandering in your own mind. What if what you find is scary? What if what you find is sad? What if what you find, how do we not get caught up in that? I feel like so many of us get addicted to work or get addicted to drama or whatever because it's almost just numbs us out to some of those other things. So for some people, mind wandering is a little scary, I think.
It can be. My playful reframe for this is a mind for all seasons. So you go through the mind, you're going to get some snowstorms, you're going to get some thunder, you're going to get some sunshine, you're going to get some lightning, you're going to get some beautiful rain, you're going to get some obnoxious rain, you're going to get beautiful leaves, you're going to get gutters that are clogged. It's if you realize that your mind is made for all seasons, that it's actually made for all these different emotions, you stop critiquing the emotions and you learn to accept them. And studies are now showing that one of the most effective ways to decrease worry, which leads to stress, is acceptance commitment therapy. So one of the things you do when you encounter those emotions is you don't judge them. Rather than judging them, you just notice them. You're like, oh wow, if I go there, I feel sad. Interesting. If I go there, I feel happy. That's interesting. And the beautiful part is that every human being has all of these emotions all the time. Right. And the beauty of life and sort of getting over these stresses is that mind wandering is frightening only so far as you are unfamiliar with it. But if you start to become familiar with your own emotions, they stop feeling like shrapnel. They stop feeling like some kind of dangerous sort of enemy, and they start becoming your friends. So,
right. And even the appreciation, like I mentioned before, it's just seeing it, acknowledging it, appreciating it. I find sometimes it's helpful to have that playful relationship with my narrator. I call my brain my frenemy because it's my friend, but it kind of fights me sometimes. So it's like the better I know it, the better I can use it to my advantage. So I think that playful tinkering type observation. And I want to pause for just a moment because I've got some great comments here. So people are loving what you share. Corey just said playful reframe, very helpful. And we've got some other great comments. And we had one question that I wanted to come to because I think a lot of people probably have this. And this is from Silas. And I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. But the question was that they work at a very stressful job. So they're curious what type of tinkering would be, I guess, beneficial or even appropriate to do at work. So we're talking about a lot of different ideas that sometimes tinkering is just daydreaming. Sometimes tinkering is doing something actually physical, but any kind of quick tips for somebody who wants to tinker at work?
Yes, lots. So
but other than read the book.
So there are a couple of different things that come to mind. So firstly, as I said, I'm wanting to spread the word that I think it's better to have a tinker table than a timetable. So a timetable is that calendar that we've got on our desktops where we fill every hour by hour. And it's very hard to get people to stop filling that timetable. Well, what I'm going to say is you decide at the beginning of the week to give whatever time you can afford, a half hour during your workday. Let's say you can do that 2 days a week. You start with small rewards, as you said. So you do a half hour and you say, during this time, I'm going to use this for positive, constructive daydreaming. Meaning, I'm going to literally sit back in my chair. And by the way, this is not just I just gave a talk at London Business School to the chief innovation officers of a lot of big companies, companies like Google, and one of the things we talked about was even as seriously as maybe we should have volitional daydreaming rooms, like where it becomes part of the culture that it's okay to daydream. You expose yourself to scenery, and when you expose yourself to scenery that you like, and for different people it's different things, or music, in that half hour that you set aside, that can really help you during your day. But a couple other things. Napping is incredibly helpful. So, getting a good night's sleep is great, but for a lot of people it's just not feasible given how busy they are. But if you nap for 10 minutes, you actually become much clearer. And if you nap for 90 minutes, it enhances your creativity. So the second tip I would give is and actually napping has been found by a couple of studies to be more effective than caffeine to keep you awake. So if you find like you're stressed throughout your day, what you're doing is you're exhausting your focus circuits, and you need to turn on your unfocused circuits, which is why positive constructive daydreaming or napping can be helpful. The other thing that's particularly helpful is doodling. So did you know that when you doodle, when you're listening to something, so let's say you're on a conference call and you're like, oh my God, this is so boring. What am I going to do? We generally think we have to really attend in order to make this work. Studies show that when you're doodling, your memory can improve by 29%. And that's because you're not straining your focus circuits. You're actually letting and also when you doodle, you actually give, like in that bored, when you're bored, your body suddenly starts to do things to make you feel awake. Like if you ever felt sleepy on a drive, you suddenly start feeling sort of hyperactivated. Doodling is one of those things that keeps you awake. And then the last thing I'll mention is a fun one. It's what I call in the book, I call it psychological Halloweenism. And what the study showed was that you can change the way you feel, and you can change how creative you are in the course of a day by literally just adopting the persona of someone else. So in this study, they asked people to be, this is obviously a stereotype because it doesn't apply to everyone, but they asked them to be a rigid librarian or to be an eccentric poet. And then they gave them a creative problem to solve. And they found that if you just believe, so let's say you wanted to behave like an eccentric poet, and you were like, okay, today I'm going to think, put my scarf around, think. You would think that would be silly in a certain way, but there was a statistically significant improvement in creativity when you put yourself in that persona. And even the people who put themselves in the rigid librarian persona, when they put themselves in the eccentric poet persona, their creativity increased as well.
I have to say, it makes me think of Beyonce and Sasha Fierce. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But I also know that being a speaker and being really terrified at speaking, there were times when I thought about that. I'm going to and it's not that I was disauthentic, but I'm going to actually put on the persona of somebody who believes in themselves and really is confident in that. It was interesting how that happened. So we want to stay aligned with who we are, but we can be playful in that type of experience as well. So I want to pause you for 1 second. I'm going to check in again with timing and everything we're doing. Well, I keep saying we're going to do 20 minutes, and it's been over 40 minutes. It's so engaging and so fun to have these conversations. We do need to start wrapping up. So I want to just be respectful of everyone that's here and say once again, if you have questions, you can type those in the comment box on Facebook. I'm keeping an eye on those questions and comments. Danielle just posted that she loves to color. And I know coloring has become this meditative process. There's lots of coloring books available for people. And I also thought I'd share that from our NeuroGym community, I did a Mastering Your Mindset session a couple nights ago, and one of the gals, as I was presenting, was doodling and shared that back with me. And it's just, I've had people do that in presentations before, but it's such a beautiful way to put things together. And I take notes, and even though the notes aren't necessarily anything I'm going to look at later, I just find the process of kind of slowing down to capture an idea can also be helpful as well. So I want to say one more time, one of the things that you pointed out with being at work and needing to tinker a little bit is just putting on headphones and listening to music for a few minutes, going for a walk and just letting your mind kind of playfully wander. Watching a funny video can be a form of tinkering and kind of just allowing yourself to sit back and relax. But I also think another piece that I maybe we can kind of end or start to wrap up on is how we change the culture to one that embraces this. Because you mentioned naps, for example. I remember working with Google at one point and being fascinated by these napping pods, but no one was really using them because we still have a mentality that taking time out is wasting time. And so I think that obviously individually we need to rescript that message that taking time out is restorative, that the unfocused mind is actually productive in a new way, and that we encourage each other to do that through accountability and being able to say, what is your tinker table today? How are you going to actually build that in to your schedule? Because it's not like you're just suddenly going to say, oh, I have an extra 5 minutes, I'm going to tinker. You got to put that into your schedule and actually make it happen. And then we create a culture that sees that as being productive and enhancing instead of seeing it as a waste of time. But we're so fixated on time. I think, it's like we really need to build a community that says we're going to focus on energy instead of time. We're going to focus on fully showing up and be authentic versus getting 20 or 30 things done that are just checking off a to-do list. And again, I think we all know that, but it's just a matter of actually putting it into place.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that, how often have we heard work smarter, not harder? I think anyone who takes these kinds of breaks would tell you that the payback is immense, and getting into the habit of taking these breaks is really great. Just to summarize some of what we talked about, I think we started out by emphasizing the importance of the possibility mindset, to say that something can be done, by talking about speaking in the second person, then went on to describe how we can build in these restful periods during our day, that we can do a number of different things like physical exercise or listening to music to make ourselves feel better during those times. But in addition, we can have these moments where we have this positive, constructive daydreaming, which is deliberate and is a low-level activity like gardening or knitting, that you can doodle, you can nap, and you can also really help yourself by taking on the identity of someone else. And I think one of the big themes of today is figuring out playful reframes to ourselves so we can use self-talk to change our brains, which I think was so beautifully put by you when you said, that we've got these brain cocktails and we are the bartenders for our brain cocktails.
Yes. And we love that. We love talking about cocktails and drinking. And one of these days, we're going to do one of these at happy hour and have a conversation with our, Belvedere and Blue Moon. So we're also looking for Belvedere and Blue Moon to sponsor us down the road, but that's a whole nother story. We'll do that possibility thinking thing again. So I want to go back. We had an amazing question from a very dear friend of mine, and I promised her that we would touch on this a little bit more because this happens to so many people. In fact, I just did a whole video, Linda, so I'll send this to you as well on how to rescript that. But for now, let's get your insight on guilt. How do we help people overcome the guilt of that downtime? Or, because again, logically we can say, but it's productive, so you need to think of it as productivity. But so many people, and I will say for the most part, it tends to be more women than men who are just kind of wired to take care of everybody else first. And so even if they are tinkering, they're still thinking about all these other things they should be doing. How do we rescript that?
So again, I could talk to you about literally like 200 webinars about this.
And maybe we will. Maybe that'll be a topic for next time too. So we don't have to cram it all in, but we'll share a couple minutes here.
One paradigm that I think I brought up at this conference at London Business School I was telling you about. So Kierkegaard, the philosopher, talked about our ambivalent relationship with freedom. That we all say we want freedom, but at the same time, when we are given freedom, we become dizzy in it. And the moment we become dizzy by this open space and this, it's like going into a parking lot and seeing that you can park in like a million different places. You're like, oh my God, I don't know where to park. Whereas if there's one parking spot, you can go to the parking spot and go right in. So So guilt is a way of filling up the parking lot. It's basically a way of saying, I need some shackle to give me gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I won't feel dizzy in the space of freedom. And so I would say, as a major reframe, one of the things we need to ask ourselves is how can we begin to accept the freedom that we're asking for? And secondly, when the guilt is there, if we can observe the guilt rather than try to extricate it or remove it, what is this feeling about guilt? Underlying guilt is something like, I don't deserve it. And so my
Yes.
question to Linda in that context would be, if you want to understand this more deeply, what historically, what event happened that created this repetitive brain narrative, which remember is just a brain circuit, and
Right.
how can we get that circuit to quiet down and increase permissions in the circuit that has to do with freedom? And so the big frame from my perspective is, if there is guilt, practically speaking, know that there are tons of studies that show that your productivity will be improved if you activate your unfocused circuits with your focused circuits. The second thing is, from a philosophical perspective, ask yourself, what kind of relationship do I have with freedom? And can I learn? Freedom is not just something you get and then you're like, yeah, that's amazing. That's great. Freedom, like a beautiful ocean, you've got to learn to swim. Freedom, you've got to learn to navigate through. And I think that the more mindful we are about how to navigate through freedom, the less we'll feel like, spacemen who have no gravity and are not, even they have to train how to not be in a place that there's no gravity. So
Yeah.
emotional freedom is so important.
I think you hit such a nerve. I know you did with me, and in a good way, a good nerve with me. And I can tell based on comments that people are really resonating with that. So once again, we have a topic for next time that organically came from this. And I think it would be really powerful because it relates so much to our experience of stress. And that is, how do we deal with some of these feelings, these emotions, or these parking lot opportunities where we're focusing our attention on something that's not serving us, and particularly around guilt, around taking care of ourselves, guilt for taking downtime, because we know that's going to transform stress is more recovery, more relaxation, more play. We know that. So how do we overcome those really big mental blocks around guilt and shame and being lazy, or whatever your script is? So if you're watching this today and that's a challenge for you, I want to invite you to share. I'm going to do a post after this, just kind of talking about what we're going to be sharing for next week. But I would encourage you to, if you're comfortable, share your script, share with us what those blocks are that are hindering your ability to take care of yourself. And we'll do that, including the freedom thing. I think a lot of people are talking about that. I know for me too, it's like, I want this freedom, but when I have it, I feel guilty because it's like not everybody has it. So why should I have it? What makes me so great to think that I can? But yet it's what we're fighting for. It's so huge. And Srini, I don't want to cut us off, but I have to, because I need to get on a call, and I know you have to get on something, and I know people need to go. So this is Stress Talk Live, and we're going to be back again next week. We're actually going to be an hour earlier next week. We'll be here at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So for me, but that's what works in our schedules. It's going to be November 30th, also on a Wednesday, and we will talk about how to overcome the obstacles that get in the way of taking care of ourselves, because that's such a big part of stress management. So Srini, any last thoughts that you want to share with the group?
If you take one thing away from today, take away the feeling of possibility. And as we continue these conversations, we will give you the tools that you need to make this possibility a reality.
Beautiful. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us live, and everybody that's going to watch the recording. If you like this, share it with your friends. We'll be back again next week. We look forward to seeing you, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And please practice this. What a perfect time to practice the playful reframe, because we know that holidays can be very stressful for people because our expectations are so high. So enjoy it, tinker your way through it, and we look forward to seeing you next week. So I'm going to leave the broadcast. Rainey, if I don't see you, we will catch up again soon. So thank you for being here with me. Bless you, everybody.